Well, good evening, good afternoon, folks. Welcome to our May Teach Climate Network workshop. My name is Seth Spencer. I am the Teach Climate Network coordinator for climate generation, and this is our ninth and final workshop of the 2023-24 school year. We are going to be recording tonight, but I'll go ahead and pass it over to our presenter tonight, Ryan with the U.S. Forest Service, talking about wildlife and climate change in a specific part of northern Minnesota, the Superior National Forest. Take it away, Ryan.
All right, yeah, thanks, Seth. I'm happy to be here. So yeah, like Seth said, I work for the Forest Service. My job title is wildlife technician, so I think I've got a pretty cool job. I get to be outside and I do surveys for wildlife, and part of my job is kind of getting a finger on the pulse of our local populations of animals and how we might create opportunities for animals habitat wise. And we also do forest management. So I'll get into that a little bit, but I'm going to talk a little bit about climate change and how it relates to a lot of the wildlife species that call the Superior National Forest home. And that's the forest that I work on here. So yeah, what makes Minnesota pretty interesting ecologically is that we have four North American biomes that meet in the state. And the eastern broadleaf forest, the prairie, the tallgrass, aspen parkland, and the northern boreal forest. And where the Superior National Forest, that where I'm stationed, is kind of more in that coniferous forest area, up the north shore of Minnesota. Um, and so here you can see a map of the Chippewa National Forest, which is the other national forest in the state, and then the Superior kind of up in the Arrowhead region. Um, and so we're primarily going to focus on the Superior National Forest for this talk. And so the Superior is a pretty special place. I feel lucky to live and work here and maintain the natural resources. We got clean lakes, rivers, streams, bogs, abundant winter snow, summer temperatures are pretty nice. We got a lot of rich cultural history, and we're renowned for the remoteness of the million-acre Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, where I was actually just at today for a brief mission. So there are 5 districts on the Superior National Forest. They include Tofte, Gunflint, LaCroix, Laurentian, and Quishwe. And here you're going to see a star up here, which is on the Tofte district, and that's where I'm based out of, but I do make it to the other districts as well. And so the Forest Service operates, we have a number of different program areas that kind of work together, both, individually on each district, but then also across district boundaries. And so there's a recreation department, there's wilderness, there's fire and fuels, there's silviculture. So that's like the reforestation aspect, timber. They do timber sales and timber management. There's law enforcement. We have tribal relations. We have heritage, which is kind of like archaeology, protecting those culturally significant sites. There's interpretation. We have a naturalist, fisheries, hydrology work, and then also wildlife. And so I'm a part of the wildlife team here. So what does the wildlife department do? So we do a variety of surveys and monitoring that's related to tracking local populations on the forest. And since we actively manage the forested landscape, we're required to mitigate for potential effects to sensitive species. And we also look for opportunities to use management for habitat enhancement or restoration. Um, and we share data and goals with some other agencies as well. We work together, across ownership boundaries. So listed on this slide are some of our partners, the American Bird Conservancy, the University of Minnesota. We have the Fond du Lac Band, and Nature Conservancy on there, Natural Resource Research Institute, and the DNR, just some example of some of the partners we work with. And these pictures are different wildlife surveys. One of them is a spruce grouse pellet count that we do in this early spring. And then we have a technician checking a device that we use to listen for owls at night. There's also Hannah in the second from the right there. She's collecting lynx scat, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then Dave Grosich is the wildlife biologist on Tofty. He's holding an owl there. We responded to sometimes we respond to injured wildlife and try to help get them to the rehab facilities and whatnot. So, so these are some of our goals here. Part of the Forest Service mission is to provide for the public for the current and future enjoyment of wildlife resources on National Forest System lands. And so you'll see that one of the goals under here is to be well positioned and to foresee and respond to new and emerging issues. And so, the one we're kind of focusing on with this talk is climate change. And so we have a list, which is developed by a team of specialists, and it's called the Regional Forester Sensitive Species. So we keep track of these species that may be showing signs of population decline. And by our protection and management of habitat, we'll hopefully prevent the species from trending toward federal listing. Although there's not it's not always possible for us to reverse that trend if these factors are outside of our control. So we can only control what we can. But those are a list of some of the species on there that we'll touch on in a little bit. So in November of 2023, we had someone from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Representative Joseph Moore. He came from the National Weather Service station in Duluth, and he prepared a talk for us about climate change that was specifically focused on the northeastern Minnesota region where we're located. And so these next few slides were adapted from his talk with permission from him. So this was one of his summary slides. So he said basically that climate change is driving changes to our daily weather, and it's likely going to impact the health of the people and wildlife in Minnesota. And very likely, and with high confidence, there's going to be warmer temperatures, reduced air quality, and extreme precipitation events. And so that manifests itself in a few different ways. So one of the things that he talked about was that we're likely to experience less lake ice on Lake Superior, which could mean more lake effect snow. And so this slide shows a change in the ice cover duration from 1973 to 2019. So over time, we're getting less ice coverage on the lake, which was warming it up, and that can cause higher snowfall totals in some of these snow events. So yeah, in the past, these lakes have had a history of freezing almost completely, and that's becoming less common. And so he was expecting a snowier trend for Northeast Minnesota in the short term. So he predicted that for the next 20 years or so, we may experience higher snow totals over the winter season and have heavier, wetter snowstorms. And so in this slide, he's showing from 1971 to 2000, and then these other time periods, the difference in snowfall has been increasing over time, and that's likely to continue. This is a graphic from NOAA, and it shows an analysis of Minnesota winter as a whole compared to the rest of the country. And so you can see where that in that red blotch there. So February 2024 finished as the warmest on record for Minnesota and Wisconsin. And in fact, every county in both states and Michigan had their warmest winter on record in 2023-24. So although we can't just look at one winter and say climate change, these abnormalities seem to be becoming more frequent. So another thing that he talked about was drought. And it's likely that the frequency and intensity of drought is going to change. The International Panel of Climate Change Scientists have high confidence that a warmer climate will intensify very dry weather. And so for us at the Forest Service, that can mean quite a few things. And one of the things that it could mean is a change in wildfire frequency and intensity. And so climate conditions are likely to increase fire risks in our area by the end of the century. So In August of 2021, there was a wildfire on the Superior National Forest that was suspected to have started by lightning, and the fire prompted the evacuation of more than 290 homes, and it resulted in the temporary closure of the entire Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness for the first time since the 1970s. So it was a big deal, and not too far from my house, which was a little bit scary as well. But all told, it burned about 27,000 acres, but could have been much worse. So there had been extended drought leading up to the fire, and a recent outbreak of spruce budworm, which is actually a native insect, but it that budworm defoliates and kills white spruce and balsam fir, which we had a lot of in that area. And drying out trees can make really explosive fuel. And so that led to the fire's quick growth and extreme fire behavior. And even a portion of that burn was located in wet, lowland, wetland, black spruce areas, which often doesn't burn because of its capacity to hold moisture. So just a testament to how intense that fire was. So I mentioned spruce budworm. So folks are predicting that many invasive species, insect pests, and pathogens in northern forests are going to increase or become more damaging by the end of the century. So this is actually a picture I took with my drone out on personal time. I like to take a lot of pictures, so you'll see some of my photography sprinkled in here. But I noticed this line, a pretty striking line where you could see two different species of trees. So on the left, there's dying spruce and fir from the spruce budworm insect, and then there's healthy red pine on the right. And so those caterpillars that I mentioned, they defoliate the balsam fir and the spruce and often result in tree mortality. And although it is a native insect, climate change may be conducive to more severe and frequent outbreaks of this insect, and even expand its distribution northward. So trees that are already stressed from heat and drought are particularly vulnerable to those infestations. And those moths will lay more eggs in higher temperatures, and the timing of their reproduction could shift, which could coincide with, less predator presence, such as when the birds come back from migration. That's their main predator, or different songbirds. And so if those dead and dying trees aren't removed, they could become a fire hazard around homes and buildings. So one of the things we do about that is salvage logging. And so that's used as a management strategy to kind of reduce the economic losses and also reduce the time it would take to replace the stand naturally, because we're planting trees immediately following that. And so what is all this, the climate change that we talked about, mean for wildlife? Well, these are some of the species that we kind of key in on. They're on that regional forester sensitive species list that I mentioned, and we'll look at a few of them more closely, but I won't be able to cover all of the species. So here's another prediction from a fellow, Dr. Ron Moen. He's an associate professor in biology at the University of Minnesota, Duluth, and a senior research associate with the Natural Resource Research Institute. And his predictions are based on peer-reviewed scientific literature. So in this graph, he has forest mammal species in 2070. And so he's kind of predicting that you can see in this column down here, there are 12 species that we're likely to lose by 2070. And so included in that are snowshoe hare, least chipmunk, northern flying squirrel, the jumping mouse, wood porcupine, pine marten, fisher, Canada lynx, moose. So he's pointing to some of the scientific literature and thinking that a lot of these are probably not going to be around by then. So we'll take a closer look, and those are mammal species. Obviously, there's other things that can happen too, but he's kind of a mammal specialist. But along with that, he speculates that some new species may move into the state within the 50-year time frame. And those gaps, those niches left by exiting species, they might be filled by new ones. And just like that quote from Jurassic Park, life finds a way. So we might see some new species coming into the state. some different bat species he's highlighting there, and also some rodent species as well. So this is called the Adaptation Workbook, and this is one of those resources that I figured it might be interesting to highlight because I know that you have teachers, that might watch this or be interested. And it's this resource is an online resource. It was created by the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science recently, and it's free to create an account. It's kind of a structured process to consider the potential effects of climate change, and allows you to design land management and conservation actions that could help prepare for changing conditions. And so it's completely flexible process to accommodate a wide variety of different geographic locations, ownership types, county, state, federal, private, um, ecosystems and land uses, um, depending on what your management goals might be. So maybe you could use this for a school forest and kind of go through the process with the students. You could, define your goals and objectives for it, assess the climate impacts and vulnerabilities, evaluate objectives considering climate, identify adaptation approaches and tactics, and monitoring effectiveness of the actions that you decide to do. And that link is where you can find it. There's also some helpful tutorial videos that kind of walk you through a step-by-step process designed to help you consider how climate change might affect the land that you're interested in and the conservation goals that you have. So I think it could be tailored to it's more tailored towards natural resource professionals, but I don't see why it couldn't be adapted to curriculum for students. And so Katie Frecker is the Forest Service representative who you'd connect with if you had questions about specifically using this resource. And I can get you her contact information over to Seth if folks have interest in that. And so northern Minnesota's boreal species are likely going to increase stress from climate change. And it's generally expected that these warmer temperatures are going to be more favorable to species that are located at the northern extent of their range and less favorable to those at the southern extent. And so one of the poster childs is the moose. And so you'll see the moose is bedded down in some conifer in this photo, and that just goes to show how important temperature regulation is for them. They're large mammals, and they can expend a lot of energy trying to stay cool, especially in the winter. So they seek, or in the summer rather, so they seek shade, relief from that. So this is an assessment and adaptation plan finalized in 2016 by the tribal entities in the 1854 ceded territory, and it identifies culturally significant plants and animals and their associated sensitivities and adaptability to climate change. And so I think it's a really useful table here, and you can kind of see, where different species might fall. And some of the ones we'll talk about are kind of in this category that I just put a red box around, including, moose and some of the fur bearers, and some of the bird species listed there as well. So this is the spruce grouse, and research shows that as temperatures are kind of rising and the climate's changing, that their sensitivity is considered more in the high category. Their adaptive capacity is low. And so they're associated with coniferous forest, which is projected to be reduced by climate change. And any shifts to that preferred habitat could mean a significant reduction in their population size. And spruce grouse really like that lowland black spruce areas, and also jack pine. This one is this is a male spruce grouse. He's got those red eyebrows and a big beautiful tail fanned out. This time of year in the spring, they're displaying for mates, and so it was pretty cool to see one of those. So I mentioned the spruce grouse. Other lowland conifer associates include the boreal chickadee. So that's a picture of a black spruce stand on the right. On the left is a boreal chickadee. So some species associated with this type of forest are showing decreasing trends in northeastern Minnesota, and we found that out through different point counts. So that's where either Forest Service staff or someone from the University of Minnesota goes out each year and they listen in the same areas at a point, and they listen for which species are calling, and they record that. And so we can see trends over time, and some of the species showing a decline that are associated with this forest are the Connecticut warbler, olive-sided flycatcher, and winter wren, as well as that boreal chickadee. The common loon is also, kind of an icon of Minnesota, and uh, the biggest change is a northward shift from their preferred summer habitat. Some projections show that across the United States, it's projected to lose 56% of its current summer range and 75% of its current winter range. So there isn't a whole lot we can do for loons as the Forest Service, but we do, mitigate and try to do some restoration projects around bodies of water to try to keep that body of water healthy, such as planting trees and limiting erosion and stuff like that. So here are some species that are known as tree cavity excavators. They're also keystone species, and so by that I mean they're critically important because they provide ecosystem services for other creatures as well. So some of the ones in this picture are in the woodpecker family. So there's the pileated woodpecker on the left, the downy woodpecker, and the northern flicker, blackback woodpeckers, also the hairy woodpecker. Um, these all excavate their own holes in trees, in dead trees and in live trees on the landscape. And when those holes are abandoned, it creates real estate for a large host of other species that make use of those that don't have the ability to create their own tree hollow. And so there have been some interesting trends that have come out recently that the NRRI found, that the northern flicker and downy woodpeckers may be showing a downward trend. So we want to watch those closely because they're really important. These are some of the species that those excavators provide for. So the northern flying squirrel is one. In the middle there, we have a fisher, which are obligate cavity nesters. The female fishers raise their young in tree hollows, and so they look for big holes, created by a pileated woodpecker, and they use it. The pine marten is there, and then there's a saw-whet owl making use of an aspen tree that was likely from an old woodpecker hole. So these are some species we're watching closely as well. So what can we do about those cavity trees? Well, one of the things we do is we're trying to um, you know, advocate for the protection of some of these trees, and allow some trees to grow and reach that large size, because there's some evidence that there may not be, there might be a limiting factor of these on the Minnesota landscape as a whole. And so not allowing some aspen is one species especially that's really important as cavity trees, allowing them to grow past that typical like rotation age, so the timber might want to harvest trees when they reach a certain age, and if you can allow some of them to grow beyond that, then they become really important for wildlife. So creating reserve patches where we don't cut, or single trees, allowing those to grow as well. Also planting long-lived conifers like white pine and cedar. And this picture is my friend Gary, and he's standing next to just a huge white pine, which is really cool to see those in the landscape. And they can provide a lot for critters. Bats are another cavity nester that I haven't mentioned yet. They really need crevices and hollowed out trees. So allowing them to really get old and sort of to the point where the trees are sort of starting to rot a little bit, that can create space and habitat inside them. And then, of course, maintaining a diversity of forest age classes on the landscape as well. So here's an example of some aspen that were kind of allowed to grow beyond when they would typically be cut. And you can even see a large stick nest up in the top of one of those aspens. So the northern goshawk is one of our sensitive species that we try to protect and mitigate for. So we look for those stick nests and we monitor historical sites where they might have been active, and they show some, it's called site fidelity, where the birds actually go back to the same nest year after year. The Canada lynx is another species that has is projected to, not be positively impacted. So the lynx are in the cat family, of course, and they have this competitive advantage in deep snow over other predators that eat similar prey. So that would include wolves and bobcats and coyotes. Uh, those animals just don't have the same type of feet, the snowshoe type paws that the lynx have, that allows them to be really efficient um, at eating their prey, the snowshoe hare. And so we're also seeing expanding bobcat ranges in Minnesota, which could continue to overlap with the lynx. And we've actually documented some hybridization through our DNA work, which I'll talk about in a second, which could have an impact on the species. And then declines in the abundance and distribution of snowshoe hare could also impact them. So this picture, so what we do in the winter is we monitor Canada lynx. So we'll go out in a truck or on skis, and we'll actually look for tracks of the cat, and we backtrack or we foretrack them. So that means either following the tracks back in time or forward in time, until we find a sample. And by a sample, I mean they go to the bathroom at some point. And so we actually can collect that and we can send it to a laboratory, and they can actually tell us some really interesting information about their genetics and their relatedness, and other fascinating things. So that blue line there is showing one set of lynx tracks on the left. Here's another set, and then there's another set. So there were three different animals traveling together. So that indicates a family group. And then that red line is actually their prey, snowshoe hare tracks, a kind of a worn trail that they were hunting. And then you can see that little spot in the snow, that's actually the scat that we collected. As that scat passes through their intestines, it actually sheds cells that we can use for DNA analysis. And so here's a picture of me collecting that sample. Sometimes we'll find hair that's stuck to like the inside of a bed in the snow. We might take that as well. We take GPS coordinates. We carefully place the sample in a paper bag. We dry it out, and then we send it in to the Rocky Mountain Research Laboratory. And then from there, they do their magic and they send us back some really interesting results. So this is our long-term data set that has been over 23 years that we've been collecting DNA on lynx. They are a federally threatened species, and so that's part of the reason why we monitor for them. This map shows what we know about the confirmed distribution of lynx in Northeast Minnesota, so we can see where they occur geographically. And the Minnesota locations are fairly confined to the Northeast, as you'll see, and particularly on the Superior National Forest. There are some points outside the forest boundary, and those are mostly collected by the DNR. And those are typically, a confirmed trapping incident. Every once in a while, someone who's trapping bobcat accidentally catches a lynx and has to release it. But we can get some really interesting things from that. So one of the things that we found is we've documented hybridization. So this spread was published in the National Wildlife Federation magazine, and it's to discuss that hybridization issue. They've also seen this out east, like in Maine, where there's a population of both bobcats and lynx. And so humans are changing how wild species meet and they mate. And climate change has unpredictable consequences as well. And so, as that snow cover decreases, it might increase in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to decrease. And it allows, it lessens that competitive advantage that lynx have and allows other critters like the bobcat to further overlap into their range if there's not as deep a snow, especially in the winter. And so that interbreeding with bobcats could actually dilute the genetic adaptations that they have and potentially jeopardize its survival. Um, so here is a graph showing what we found from the DNA work. And so we've actually documented 13 hybrids. Interestingly, all of the mothers of the hybrids were lynx and the fathers were all bobcat. And the hybrids displayed a range of morphological features that were common to both. But it results in an animal that's, that is different. Um, so, so yeah. So another creature is snowshoe hare. That the lynx really depends on the snowshoe hare for its survival. Um, and here's another critter, the ermine. These two species, they both change their fur color twice a year to blend in with their surroundings. And as you can see in the picture on the right, if we're starting to see snow coming later in the season, but they've changed too early, it can make the snowshoe hare a lot more vulnerable to predation. And the same thing could happen with the ermine, which is in the weasel family. So yeah, with changes in that phenology, that could really impact their ability to survive without that adequate camouflage. So moose, really iconic species here and also really susceptible. So research is showing that as temperatures rise, they're less able to regulate their internal body temperatures and can quickly overheat. And so that can manifest itself in panting, like slow movement, changes in feeding, can result in poor nutrition, heightened sensitivity to parasites like ticks, snow depth, temperature, winter length, forest composition. Those all influence how moose move and use the habitat and have access to forage and cover. And also overlapping with deer is a big problem because deer benefit from warmer temperatures, and they can transmit a parasite that's benign to the deer but fatal to the moose. So that's definitely something that we're looking at. And what we do about this is, the DNR is more in the game of managing populations, and we're more in the game of managing habitat on the forest. And so one of the areas we look for is, to offset some of these pressures from climate change is to make sure that we're providing enough habitat for them. And there may even be opportunities to enhance areas. So we'll go in and we'll look for an area that has a high population of moose and look for acres that have either been overused to the point where there's not much nutrition left in the brush, or maybe it's grown too high out of their reach. So in this picture, all that brush has just been mowed almost like a lawnmower to the point where they're not benefiting much from it anymore. And anytime you see balsam fir that's been heavily browsed, it also means it's not a preferred species for them to eat. So it means that they're kind of struggling to find good food sources. Also, if you see them scraping their incisors on some of this alderbrush, that's another indication. And anytime you see, we call it carrot top, where they've eaten the tops of these little seedlings or brush so many times that the tree becomes stunted and it's like a little bush. And at this point, there's not much nutrition left for them. And so we can come in and we can do something to reset the brush. So basically we make the brush angry, we treat it, we cut it, and then it stimulates a new flush of growth from the base of those plants that will benefit the moose anew for the next, 10 years or so before it gets too big. So one of the things we do also is we diversity plant long-lived conifers. We have crews go in and plant because that thermal cover is really important for the moose. And also having a wide diversity of trees on the landscape is more, conducive to threats from climate change. These are some of the species listed on the left that we actually plant on the forest. Now is the time of year that the crews are out there doing that. And then also we have this assisted migration plan. And so that's where, tree populations on the forest, they got to either adapt, migrate, or face possible local extinction as the climate changes. But there are, there are predicted changes that exceed the adaptation abilities of many of these trees. And so that's where assisted migration comes in. And it's a strategy that can help our forest increase resiliency by planting climate adapted tree species in genotypes strategically. And so basically that kind of looks like this. This is a graphic demonstrating each type of assisted migration. It uses little conifer tree icons in there, though the three types of migration that we do are applicable to all different species of trees. And so basically we go to zones further south where the trees are locally adapted for warmer climate conditions. And then we collect that seed and we plant the trees from that locally adapted source further north. And that can help them survive better.
Ryan, I have a
Yeah,
quick
go ahead.
question. Has the Spirit National Forest or the Forest Service in general had to already change the tree species that they would normally be planting because the typical tree is not surviving?
No, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but that could be, that could be coming. So we are looking at some new species to try planting, especially with there's this invasive species that some folks have probably or might have heard about called the emerald ash borer, and that really can decimate the black ash stands. And so if those are eliminated, we need something to, fill their place. And so, looking at like American elm could be a species that could do well in areas that the black ash thrive that are kind of wet soils and whatnot. So it is something that we're looking into, and there have been some small kind of experimental plantings that especially like the Nature Conservancy has done on the shore of Lake Superior. But the Forest Service hasn't introduced any new species at this point. It's mostly finding trees that already grow here, but that are, locally adapted to more southerly locations. So yeah, this slide just kind of shows some other groups that you could check out. These are different either articles or a landing page for these other organizations that we work closely with. So the American Bird Conservancy does a lot of important work. The Nature Conservancy, I mentioned, the North Shore Forest Collaborative, they do a lot to restore long-lived conifers on the North Shore of Minnesota. The Moose Habitat Collaborative, they do a lot of work across ownerships. And then the Northern Forest Bird Network is also a group of different professionals that are specializing in birds and forestry and how to, set them up for success. So yeah, that's all I got. If anybody's got any questions, I'm here. Otherwise, if there's any questions that come up after you've watched the recording, just get them to Seth, and I'm happy to help out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. I'll leave it open for a second to see if there's any questions. I do have a couple of follow-up questions kind of around some of the education connections, but I'll see if there are any questions about any of the information you shared from folks.
Do you find much difference of philosophy between some of the organizations or agencies that are involved here? I mean, you mentioned, for example, that the DNR is working more on wildlife and you're working more on habitat. What other kinds of philosophical differences do you find among some of the entities involved?
I haven't really seen too many philosophical differences. I think for the most part, we work pretty well across the organizations and we have similar goals. you know, a lot of these groups, you know, want to be land stewards, and they want to provide for that next generation. And so, you know, I think for the most part, as far as wildlife is concerned, I think folks are on the same page, especially, you know, the ones I can speak to are, you know, the moose habitat work that we're doing, and also, you know, considering different bird species. It's pretty cool to see that a lot of these collaborative groups are, you know, 10 organizations or more, you know, bringing their specialists together and thinking about, you know, okay, what are we observing, and what can we do, you know, management wise with forestry or other work. So like prescribed burning is a big thing as well that we try to do to put some fire back on a landscape that is fire dependent. Um, so yeah, I'm sure there's some differences out there, but I haven't seen too much of it personally.
Yes, maybe I could have phrased it as management goals, for example,
No,
management for hunting, versus management for, I don't know, some
oh
other
sure,
kind of recreation or those kind of
yeah.
things.
Sure. Yeah, there is certainly, you know, I think with some of the game species in particular, you know, that can certainly bring in the funding. And so, you know, that is you know, it's maybe more of a larger issue that we need to be as a society valuing more of these species that you know, aren't necessarily hunted. You know, we need to, you know, think about the birders and everybody else as well. But yeah, sometimes the projects can use you know, those game species as more of the poster to get the funding. So that's certainly something that happens.
Ryan, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to maybe how unique boreal forest is in, I was going to say the United States, but I'll speak specifically to the lower 48, and why it is maybe so important to try to keep some of that, or maybe
Yeah.
mitigate some of those impacts around climate change. Because from what I know, there's maybe boreal forests in like 3 or 4 other states in the
Yeah,
lower 48.
yeah, exactly. And so just kind of see if I can find that slide here. So yeah, so I think what you're getting at is this. And so, like you said, there's only a handful of states that have the boreal forest, and we're at the southern edge of the boreal forest that extends up into Canada. And so, with climate change, a lot of those boreal forest species are more vulnerable because we see climate change, you know, more drastically at the poles rather than, you know, more central. And so that rate of change is happening quicker in these northern latitudes than in other places. And so that's why the boreal forest species are more susceptible.
And then I had mentioned to folks in the chat that I'll be following up with resources and stuff like that. But Ryan, my guess is that you're not the only um, forest technician or biologist doing this within the Forest Service. And from what I know, the Forest Service is massive, and there's locations in almost every state, but like Iowa, New Jersey. So, do you think educators could use the Forest Service as a resource to like check in on what their local national forests might be doing around climate change?
For sure. Yep, I think so. And a good place to start, you know, depending on where people are geographically is, you know, what's the nearest national forest to you, and you know, hopping online, getting to that landing page, you know, just Googling, you know, Superior National Forest or Chippewa National Forest, and you know, finding the tab for the wildlife, and you could reach out to, you know, the interpretation folks, or even call the office if you want to chat with someone and see what kind of resources are available. Um, you could start there, and I'm certainly a resource. But yeah, we have a team of folks. Like I said, you know, we got the 5 districts, and there's a lot of folks out there doing this. There's a biologist on each of the 5 districts, and then we have, you know, 1 to 2 wildlife technicians doing the field work mostly on those. So yeah, we're here and we're we're here. It's a public resource, the National Forest, and so we're here for you. Yeah.
And I think that's something I wanted to kind of stress for educators that might be watching the recording is that there are these amazing, I mean, local, state, and federal organizations doing work around climate change adaptation. And often they have like an education or an interpretation wing that like their goal is to talk to students and really connect them. And so if you are in an area that maybe you don't get a lot of support, reaching out to those federal agencies that's part of their like mandate to prepare for climate change can be a great resource.
For sure. Yeah. And I've gone to local high schools and given talks for different student groups. So it's certainly something that is part of our mission, and you could reach out to local specialists and see if they'd want to come on to your classroom and tailor talk specifically, or even talk about like the career path if there's students that are interested in getting into natural resources. We definitely need to get the next generation interested and want to pick up the baton, so to speak. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. We'll of course leave any questions, but I am going to go ahead and stop the recording. And yeah, thanks so much everybody for joining us, and appreciate you all.
Good.